Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. We begin in Davos, Switzerland, where after delivering a grievance-fueled address to European leaders gathered at the World Economic Forum today and assailing many of America's closest allies, late this afternoon, President Trump abruptly changed course, dropping his threat to place tariffs on European countries and announcing a framework agreement has been reached with respect to Greenland's future. The president speaking to reporters just moments ago saying the deal, quote, gets us everything we need, but offering very few details.
Well, we have a concept of a deal. I think it's going to be a very good deal for the United States, also for them. And we're going to work together on something having to do with the Arctic as a whole, but also Greenland.
It's not specific enough to know at this point how long this lasts, whether it's
forever.
Forever.
It'll be forever.
For Greenland at this point.
Yeah. Forever.
Now, just moments ago, NATO putting out a statement saying discussions about the framework would focus on, quote, ensuring Arctic security. The statement making no mention of the U.S. annexing or taking control of the territory. The president's sudden announcement of an apparent off-ramp over Greenland comes after the European Union announced today it would halt trade negotiations with the U.S. over those now canceled tariffs, and after NATO's Secretary General met with the president. Markets ended the trading day just moments ago, rebounding on the news after plunging yesterday nearly 900 points over concerns of a trade war. The president began his day in Davos with several stern remarks on the world stage, doubling down on what he called the U.S.'s claim to Greenland, but also walking back his threat to use force to take it.
This enormous unsecured island is actually part of North America, on the northern frontier of the Western Hemisphere. That's our territory. It's the United States alone that can protect this giant mass of land, this giant piece of ice, develop it and improve it and make it so that it's good for Europe and safe for Europe and good for us. And that's the reason I'm seeking immediate negotiations to once again discuss the acquisition of Greenland by the United States. We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. They have a choice. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember.
President Trump also invoking Denmark's fall to Germany during World War II as part of his justification for why the U.S. should control Greenland, and going on to mock many of America's traditional allies.
And after the war, which we won it big. Without us, right now you'd all be speaking German and a little Japanese, perhaps. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. The problem with NATO is that we'll be there for them 100%. But I'm not sure that they'd be there for us if we gave them the call.
Now, to be clear, as we've previously noted, Article 5 of the NATO Charter has only been invoked once, after 9/11, when NATO countries came to the collective defense of the United States. Today, before President Trump's announcement of a framework of a deal, the NATO secretary reiterated the alliance's commitment to the defense pact.
You are not absolutely sure that the Europeans would come to the rescue of the US if you will be attacked. Let me tell you, they will. And they did in Afghanistan, so you can be assured, absolutely, if ever the US will be under attack, your allies will be with you. Absolutely, there's an absolute guarantee.
Joining me now is NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs Correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. Also with us is former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Nicholas Burns, and Sir Trevor Phillips, presenter of Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips on our sister network, Sky News, in the U.K. Thank you all so much for joining us. Kelly, I'm going to start with you. Extraordinary day of developments at NATO. The president started his day with that speech lambasting the United States allies, and then with this whiplash, saying, yes, we've reached the framework of a trade deal. What do you make of it? Where is it all going from here?
It is a stunning day, in part because the tone does matter. The president used very harsh, at times insulting, even degrading language of nations that have been at the side of the United States for decades. And he asserted powers that the United States would only use in extreme cases. So to even discuss it with allies is shocking. And then a very quick change of tactics. And there was a lot of pressure brought to bear. Certainly the EU had talked about backing out of a trade agreement that the president had touted as a victory just months ago, an important trade pact. They were willing to put that aside. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, making clear that NATO has in fact supported the United States. How the president asserts that against the evidence of history is stunning on itself. And to now, basically, it seems the framework is to stop talking about Greenland. And by that, I mean, they can't say if it's ownership. They can't say, he said forever. Clearly, that's not the nature of one of these agreements. So they have reached a point where they, I think, have made clear to him the Danish people will own Greenland. Greenland will self-determine its own future. And they want that partnership. And so the U.S. has had an invitation to expand in Greenland for 50, 60 years. So it is a stunning turn of events. The president went in with an intent to show strength and to show the force of his presidency, and he ended up perhaps getting something he wanted, but the real assessment in this moment is that he's not going to buy Greenland. He's not going to invade Greenland. He'll have access to Greenland, which is where we were weeks ago.
Walking back from that core demand that he had, Kelly, one of the aspects of his speech that people took note of, the fact that he seemed to repeatedly confuse Iceland with Greenland. I'm going to play a clip, get your reaction on the other side.
I'm helping NATO, and I've until the last few days when I told them about Iceland, they loved me. They're not there for us on Iceland, that I can tell you. I mean, our stock market took the first dip yesterday because of Iceland. So Iceland's already cost us a lot of money.
What are people saying? What's the reaction been that you're hearing?
Well, what's striking about that is we always look when a president makes an error. Of course, everyone slips with the tongue. Everyone misspeaks. We give a lot of latitude for that. He had earlier in the speech referred to piece of ice in describing Greenland, which, of course, that is part of its Arctic nature. But to then repeatedly refer to Iceland and not catch himself that it was Greenland he was referring to is notable. People will decide what they think that means. The president flew overnight. His trip was delayed. He's nearly 80 years old. There's a lot going on. You can have a lot of reasons for that. But when the president makes factual errors or misstatements that might be very human, it is notable, and it was certainly notable today.
Absolutely. Kelly O'Donnell, thank you so much for starting us off today. We really appreciate it. Nick Burns, I'd like to go to you. Again, as Kelly is mapping out, there's so much that is notable about what transpired today. The fact that effectively President Trump is back to where the United States was several weeks ago. What do you make of the idea that there's now a framework for a deal in place?
Well, Kristen, I first have to say, when the president cast doubt again today on whether the NATO allies would defend the United States, I was the American ambassador to NATO on 9/11. And I remember, and this is ironic, that it was the Canadian and Danish ambassadors who were among the first to come to me to say they wanted to protect us and invoke Article 5. And as you know, Denmark had the highest, on a per capita basis, highest losses, casualties in Afghanistan over 20 years. So that bears repeating to an American audience that NATO does stand by the United States. I think this has been, I mean, what an up and down roller coaster day. Obviously, it's positive that President Trump has taken the threat of military force against a NATO ally, which was a crazy idea from the beginning, off the table. Good that the tariffs have been removed, hopefully by both sides, so that there can be rational conversation. I cannot envision any outcome short of what Kelly just said, that the Danes will not sell Greenland to the United States. And the European Union countries solidly behind Denmark. So what this might be is the administration backing down and agreeing that there has to be a NATO solution, and that was the right answer all along, because there is a 1951 agreement in place where the United States, and the Danes have been clear about this recently, can go into Greenland, establish as many bases as we want, and build up our military capacity. But if we're smart about it, this is my last point, we'll want to take advantage of the extraordinary experience in. Let's hope that that's where the president is heading.
Well, and to zoom out a little bit, and you give us such good context, Ambassador Burns, is there some damage that has already been done that cannot be unwound? You heard some of the president's remarks today, incredibly sharp, including directed at the Prime Minister of Canada.
I think there's been a lot of damage done, and the Europeans and Canadians are not going to forget the repeated threats of the use of military force by the president himself and by his press secretary and others over the last 3 weeks. How can they forget that when that's the first time since 1949 that any NATO ally has threatened to attack another? That's first. Second, as Kelly and you have both said, the extraordinary attacks on the European leaders personally, whether it's President Macron, whether it's Prime Minister Carney of Canada, the belittling of Europe's achievements, belittling of the nature of their multiracial societies, which, by the way, look a lot like our multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society that we prize, many of us here in the United States. So I think a lot of damage has been done. I think the administration did not calculate how tough and united the European response has been and will continue to be.
And I wonder if you can help us with a little bit of a reality check here. Part of the president's initial justification for wanting to take Greenland was he said there were threats by China and Russia. I spoke to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent about that today. I said, what's the national emergency here that would require imposing these tariffs? He said the national emergency is preventing a national emergency. So it doesn't seem like they were citing an imminent threat. But does China, I know you were the former ambassador to China as well, does China pose a threat in that region?
I believe both Russia and China pose, a medium to long-term threat with the melting of the polar ice cap, which means that there'll be a free passage, a navigable passage between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. And certainly the Russians and Chinese will take advantage of that. But there's no imminent threat. And again, because there is this longer-term threat, the best way for the United States is to work with Finland and Sweden and and Denmark and the other countries to be strong enough in Greenland to protect Danish territory, that the Russians and Chinese will not be successful if those are their long-term designs.
All right, Ambassador Burns, thank you so much for joining us as always. We really appreciate your insights. I want to go now to Sir Trevor Phillips. Thank you, as always, for joining us. You are always here on these really big days. Today is yet another one. And again, just remarkable developments with President Trump starting the day with that fiery speech and then the whiplash over his threats of imposing more tariffs on the United States' European allies. What do you make of what happened today?
Well, Kristen, as always, it's lovely to be with you. And what I should first say is that there is a wave of relief washing over England that there will not be Delta Force troops landing in Greenland. I think that is the first and most important thing. And I'll tell you why I'm particularly relieved about that. But there was a moment in the president's speech where he referred to his Scottish antecedents. And I could just write the next part of the speech where he said, you know what, United States, Canada, England, we all used to be part of the same country. Why don't we all get together again? But you'll have a king, and he'll live in Washington. So that's off the table. We were also slightly confused about the Iceland thing because we also have a big grocery chain here, which is called Iceland. So there was a moment there where we were slightly worried he was going to come and take over the grocery chain. But the basic point is that the temperature has been cooled a little bit. It would be great to see if this framework really is a reality. We hope that there will be some sensible conversation about the United States' need for security, and it's a legitimate one, but in the context of NATO. And I think that the one thing that I would say that is important about the reaction here is that, you know, if the president wants Europe to love him, and there was a lot of tone in his speech in which you could come down to say, why don't you guys love me? Why don't you respect me? It would be good, if you want that to happen, not to turn up and tell us you're great, you're great in the United States, and you Europeans, really, you don't know what you're doing. I don't think that's a smart way to get people to love you.
Well, you take me to my next question, because we heard incredibly strong reaction from a range of European leaders. I want to play a little bit of what the British Prime Minister said earlier today and then get your reaction on the other side.
I will not yield. Britain will not yield on our principles and values about the future of Greenland under threats of tariffs. And that is my clear position.
Prime Minister Starmer there, that you also announced it was halting work on a trade deal with the U.S. How much impact do you think that had on getting the president to this point?
Well, I hope it had some impact. We know that he likes Britain. We know that he pays attention to what British leaders think. But clearly, he may not understand just how badly some of what he said has gone down here. Bear in mind, this is a country which has not been invaded for getting on for 1,000 years. We are used to ruling ourselves and being treated as equals and treating others as equals. So I think that it may be, and we have some very skilled diplomats here, that the message finally got through to the president that it is entirely possible to protect the United States, and no country wants that to be the case more than the United Kingdom. It may finally have gotten through to him that maybe the way to do this is, if you like, not by the manners that, you know, as you know, Chris, and a lot of my family lives in the United States, and we're used to some rough stuff in Queens, New York. But perhaps those aren't the manners that need to be adopted on the international stage right now. Treat us with respect, treat us as equals, and we will support you because you are our closest allies, closest cultural fit. And, you know, we love the United States, but only if we are treated properly.
And Sir Trevor Phillips, we are talking about the reaction from leaders just very quickly. I mean, President Trump called European leaders, called Europe unrecognizable, said it was heading in the wrong direction. How do the people of Europe hear those comments, and how tuned in are they?
I think that when we hear the kinds of things that the president says, we don't recognize the country that he's describing. And I would make an open offer. I'm really happy here to say, Mr. President, come visit. I will show you around London. It is not the criminal infested hellhole that somebody has told you. Come and visit the place where I am in now. This is one of the biggest, nicest libraries in London to which I have access. You'd love it here. It will be great. So come and visit. I'll show you around. And I think you'll have a very different impression of Europe than the one you currently have.
All right, Sir Trevor Phillips, we'll see if he takes you up on that invitation. Thank you so much, as always. We really appreciate your insights on this very significant day.
Pleasure, Kirsten.
And joining me now from the ground in Nuuk, Greenland, is NBC's Ellison Barber. Ellison, thanks so much for being here. So give us what the reaction is. I know this is all just developing right now. Have you been able to get reaction from people who live there in Greenland?
We've started to a little bit. I'll be honest with you. A lot of people have just not wanted to talk about this. This has been taking up so much of their lives, so much of the conversation, particularly here in Nuuk with so many international journalists in town. We did speak to one man who, when I read him that post, and I said, at this point, we don't have more details than this, but what do you make of it? He said if it's about security, that's something he's okay with. Listen.
I think maybe they are making deal about the security of the Arctic, but I am glad to see the NATO and the European Union taking more seriously about the security in Greenland.
You know, as we've been here the last couple of days talking with people, what we hear again and again is that people are not interested in becoming part of the United States. But they have said we've had treaties with the U.S. since World War II, where there's already a base in the north, that if there wanted to be more, those are things that they believe the people here, as well as the government here, would be interested in having discussions. But when it comes to this broader topic of the idea of Greenland becoming a part of the United States, almost every single person we have spoken to have said that they are not interested in that. In fact, there's been a lot of animosity and frustration towards the idea of it and this insistence people feel like they have heard from President Donald Trump. I was speaking with a former member of parliament earlier today, shortly after we heard President Trump speaking in Davos, and she heard him make that comment referring to Greenland as an icebox. She said it's not just this giant piece of ice. We are human beings. And she said there are a lot of people here right now, and we have spoken to many of them who in the past couple of days have genuinely felt afraid because they have felt uncertain about what could possibly come next. One person we spoke to this evening, he lives in London, but his grandmother, she is a Greenlander. She lives here in Nuuk. He said he'd been visiting her the last couple of days. When I read him that post from President Trump on True Social, he said, I'm not sure I believe it. And one of the things he pointed to was he said, we saw what happened in Venezuela. He's the second person we've heard mention that. So there's still a lot of uncertainty here, still a lot of fear, and people aren't sure what to believe and what will come next. Kristen?
Well, your reporting on the ground there has just been fantastic. Ellison, thank you for bringing us an interview, responding to this breaking news. We really appreciate it. Coming up, more breaking news. House lawmakers on the Oversight Committee overwhelmingly vote to move forward with holding former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in contempt of Congress for refusing to testify in their Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Plus, a funding fight is brewing on Capitol Hill as Democrats demand an overhaul of ICE as part of negotiations to fund the government. With a shutdown deadline now just 9 days away. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We are following breaking news on Capitol Hill, where the House Oversight Committee just advanced contempt of Congress charges against former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for their refusal to appear for depositions as part of the committee's investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. The contempt measures passing overwhelmingly and with bipartisan support, 34-8 on the former president, with 9 Democrats voting in favor. 28-15 on the former Secretary of State, with 3 Democrats voting in favor. Both will now head to the House floor for a full vote. If they pass, the Clintons would be referred to the Justice Department for potential criminal prosecution. The news coming hours after the committee's chairman announced that Jeffrey Epstein co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell will be deposed next month.
We have nailed down a date, February 9th, where Ghislaine Maxwell will be deposed by this committee. Now, her lawyers have made it clear that she's going to plead the Fifth. I hope she changes her mind, because I want to hear from her.
The Oversight Committee's actions today come more than a month after the Justice Department was required by law to release all of its Epstein-related documents. The Justice Department said it uncovered more files than expected and was reviewing them for release. More than 1 million of those documents remain sealed. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona joins me now live from Capitol Hill. Mel, great to see you. So what are the next steps with the Clinton? This is a pretty significant moment.
Yeah, this is just the first step in the process. But next, these contempt resolutions will head to the House floor. We're expecting that to happen in 2 weeks. We are expecting those resolutions to pass. And then ultimately, Kristen, it's actually up to the Department of Justice whether or not to prosecute this case. But if they do decide that they want to charge the Clintons, that could carry fines or even jail time. And while there have been some people who have gone to prison because they defied Congress and were found in contempt, including someone like Steve Bannon, who defied a subpoena from the January 6th committee. So doing this to a former president, we're really in uncharted territory here, but that appears to be where we're headed with all of this.
Yeah, developments are just fascinating today, and it's putting Democrats in a really tough spot, because on the one hand, they're forced to defend the Clintons. On the other hand, one of their big priorities was talking about things like affordability and the Jeffrey Epstein files. Is there concern that this could be a distraction from all of that?
Yeah, I think this has really put Democrats in a bit of a dilemma because you're right. On the one hand, they've been really beating the drum when it comes to transparency, when it comes to the Epstein files. Some of them have said the Clintons ought to be up here speaking to the committee. But on the other hand, they also don't view Chairman Comer as a fair player in all of this. And they also fear that this could be a distraction from the fact that the DOJ has only released 1% of the Epstein files, despite the fact they were supposed to release all the files on December 19th. But just listen to what House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries had to say.
The Clintons are engaging in good faith negotiations. In fact, it's my understanding they've offered. They have offered. No one's taken James Comer's subpoena seriously. He's a joke. He's an embarrassment. He's a malignant clown. Like, there's no reason for us to take James Comer seriously.
But isn't that what Republicans said the last time, that they don't have to take it seriously in January 6th?
James Comer and House Republicans are really interested in finding the truth here? They had to be forced to even sign on to our efforts to release these files. The Department of Justice is under obligation right now to release 5 million documents, and they've released around 13,000.
In the end, both the votes for Hillary and Bill Clinton to hold them in contempt of Congress were bipartisan, but they were not unanimous, which just shows how much divide there still is in the Democratic Party over how to address this issue.
For sure. Mel Zanona, thank you so much. Appreciate the update from Capitol Hill. Coming up after the break, the Supreme Court hears arguments about the president's attempts to influence the Federal Reserve, with Fed Chair Jerome Powell in attendance. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The Supreme Court appears ready to step in and prevent President Trump from ousting Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. During a hearing today, the justices, both liberal and conservative, seemed skeptical that the president has the authority to fire Fed governors without giving them an opportunity to challenge their terminations. The Trump administration has accused Cook of mortgage fraud. She's denied the allegations, and bank documents obtained by NBC News appear to contradict the White House's claims. The effort to oust Cook is part of an intensifying pressure campaign by President Trump to assert control over the independent Federal Reserve, as he demands that it slash interest rates. Cook was in attendance at today's arguments before the High Court. It was Fed Chair Jerome Powell who's also the focus of a Justice Department investigation over renovations at the central bank. Powell has denied any wrongdoing and calls the investigation politically motivated. NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach joins me now. Gary, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. So delve into what exactly happened today at the High Court. Why did the justices seem so skeptical?
Well, two of the harshest critics were actually justices that President Trump appointed himself. Justice Amy Coney Barrett saying, why can't there be some amount of due process here for Lisa Cook? Why can't she just have a meeting with the president in the Roosevelt room, she suggested, to have that conversation, give Lisa Cook the opportunity to say, this is what really happened with these alleged mortgage fraud allegations. Justice Brett Kavanaugh saying something similar, saying, look at the big picture here. If we allow this to happen now, if we allow you to fire Lisa Cook now, what about 2028? What about 2032? If there's a Democratic president in the hot seat, will he just do the same thing? It'll be retribution, that sort of thing. Here's what Brett Kavanaugh had to say during the hearing.
Position that there's no judicial review, no process required, no remedy available, a very low bar for cause that the president alone determines. I mean, that would weaken, if not shatter, the independence of the Federal Reserve.
So it does appear the Trump administration will end up probably losing this Supreme Court case. We'll find out by the end of June.
Okay, well, we will stand by for that. And it's notable because Fed Chair Jerome Powell was in attendance. How rare was that, particularly given the fact that he's gotten a subpoena for, as you noted, being over budget in the Fed renovation?
Well, this is all really significant, and it all goes to the importance of the independence of the Federal Reserve. What the Federal Reserve Chairman does matters. What he says matters, and he knows that. He has the ability to move markets. His actions have the ability to move markets here in the U.S. and around the globe. And he knows that when he does something, it really matters. Him showing up today, very significant to really push forward the independence of the Fed so that it's not a political item, so it's not something the president can just, at his whim, do what he wants, and it stays an important independent monetary policy regulatory system.
And Gary, just big picture, explain what's at stake with this trial, with this decision?
So this is not only going to impact whether or not a Fed chair can be fired, but it's going to impact other independent boards as well. We've seen over the past year and a day, the Supreme Court has said, yeah, you can fire members of the Merit Systems Protection Board, you can fire members of the National Labor Relations Union, you can fire the Federal Trade Commission. If they say yes to the Fed chair governor, it would be very significant, not just for today, but for decades from now.
Big implications. All right, Gary Kronbach, thanks for being all over it for us. We really appreciate it. Still to come, the White House reveals new details on the president's midterm strategy and campaign plans in the run-up to the November elections. The panel is next. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. While President Trump spent today largely focused on foreign policy and foreign grievances, his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, told reporters the administration plans to keep the focus largely on domestic issues in the coming months, and that she expects the president will be hitting the road weekly ahead of the midterm, starting with an economic speech in Iowa next week. Joining me now is our panel, Dan Merrick, co-anchor of the Early Brief newsletter at The Washington Post, Arshie Siddiqui, former senior aide to Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, and Lonnie Chen, fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University and an NBC News contributor. Thanks to all of you for being here. Dan, I have to start with you and these remarkable developments out of Davos, the whiplash that we saw today. The president starting the day with this really tough talk and then saying, we got a trade deal. What do you make of this? Was it because the markets cratered yesterday? Was it because of pressure from European allies? Both? What do you make of it?
We know that the president often responds to the market. He watches it closely. He often writes about when it's doing incredibly well and ignores it when it's not doing well. So that is possibly one of the things. But today really showed how unencumbered the president is in the second term, how he thinks he has ultimate power and he plans to use that ultimate power. The speech at Davos was really a remarkable moment. I think the president has given a lot of these saber-rattling speeches before. You think about other Davos speeches, the United Nations. The reaction is what stuck out. I think since the arrest of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, there was a reaction from the international community that you have to take what the president is saying honestly and take him at face value, because it does seem like in past administrations maybe he would say something and not follow through. That is the case with the tariffs, as you mentioned. There is some sense among the international community that he will follow through with some of these threats, as he did in Venezuela. And that's why I think the reaction in Davos in particular was some shock by what he was saying, because it was so forceful and direct in what he hopes to achieve.
It's a really important point. It underscores one of the many differences between Trump's first term and Trump 2.0. The fact that now he's moving at such a fast pace, Lonnie, the fact that we saw him actually remove Nicolas Maduro, and that has changed how these foreign leaders actually view him. What do you make of their reaction in Davos and beyond? Because quite frankly, they made it very clear over the weekend they would band together and fire back at these tariffs.
Yeah, well, I think their reaction is interesting, because the reaction in the room with him is probably going to be different than the reaction when they're just out there in public. When they're out there in public, they take a very tough stand. And then when they get in the room with the president, it appears as though they want to strike a deal. And so I think part of the challenge is that we can comment on what the president's been doing. The reality is it has gotten people to the table. Now, whether in fact we've got a deal, who knows? We don't know what the deal really is in this situation.
He says it will be a forever deal.
Well, right. That's forever's a very long time. And so I tend to think that what we're seeing right now is people have been dealing with President Trump now for some number of years. In this term, I think it's a great point. He is not constrained in the same way he was. He doesn't have people around him who are constraining him. He's got people around him who are basically saying, whatever you want to do is what we should do. And it's kind of an unusual setup. And as a result, I think foreign leaders aren't sure where to go. And so a lot of them end up communicating directly with the president.
Arshie, where do you see this going? And what are your Democratic colleagues saying about the day's events?
I mean, I think it was stunning, because in some ways it was a manufactured crisis, self-inflicted. Now we have this quote-unquote solution, which is likely going to be the status quo, because Greenland was already cooperative, and then plus with some bells and whistles potentially. And so at the end of the day, I think it was stunning, and this is kind of the chatter that I heard today, is that he traveled across the ocean to go and really criticize European leaders in their own backyard and was very aggressive about it. And I think you see these countries now making contingency planning in terms of they can't count on the United States. And so that gives China an opening, and it creates it really shifts the whole landscape geopolitically.
Yeah, and the question about can some of the damage not be undone, Dan, given that the remarks were so forceful, and it does come as Chief of Staff Susie Wiles is signaling that the president is going to be out on the campaign trail weekly. He's going to Iowa, apparently, next week. She wants him to be laser focused on the economy, on affordability. Is that a realistic shift? I mean, he's increasingly focused on these foreign entanglements.
Good luck, Susie Wiles. I mean, I think there's a difference between her saying that it will happen and him actually sticking to that script. They have said for, I think, weeks, months now that he'll be focused on the economy, he'll be focused on affordability. I think since the November elections in 2025, when Republicans really took a beating at the polls, they said that was going to be his focus in the midterms. I don't think he's really done that since those elections. He's been very focused on Greenland, on Venezuela, on the world economy, and just the world in general. And so it remains to be seen whether he'll actually stick to that script. I think if you talk to a lot of Trump voters in 2024, they would be shocked that in 2026 the president would be spending so much time on foreign affairs, given how much he ran on domestic policy issues. And it does remain to be seen whether that will he'll have to pay the price for that at the ballot box in 2026. But I do think Democrats will somewhat welcome the fact that he's going to be out there talking a lot.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think he has, in many ways, he sort of hasn't even acknowledged the affordability challenges, and I think he's really, maybe in his own mind, not sure how real that is in some ways, right, or how to address it. But what strikes me is even when he's on foreign soil, he's still giving a speech targeted at a domestic audience. If you think about the way he talks about Europe, the way he talks about America, the way he talks about the relationships between the two, it really is meant to appeal to the same base as if he were delivering the speech in Des Moines or in Raleigh or somewhere in the U.S. It's really remarkable how I think he keeps his focus on the same audience regardless.
I think that's right, but at the same time, he also painted a very rosy picture of the economic outlook in the United States and the state of play. And I think we've seen a rash of polling that doesn't match up with reality.
It is interesting. One of his economic proposals is to cap credit card interest rates. He had a phone conversation, Dan, with Elizabeth Warren. Notice reporting last week that one senior House Republican offered harsh words about the president's attempts to address concerns about rising costs, saying, quote, "Stop proposing this populist expletive," this person said, to the point that we are having. I mean, does this, in fact, potentially run the risk of alienating his base and maybe winning over some other voters in the midterms?
I have a hard time believing much of anything that President Trump does would alienate a portion of his base. I would imagine that House Republican member who courageously put his name to that or her name to that voted for the president in 2024, probably supports the president. He ran as a populist. It should not be shocking that he is running his White House as a populist. There are plenty of Republicans who have said publicly that they do not support this credit card plan because, in some words, that would hurt the ability to get credit for low-income Americans, which is something, a conversation certainly worth having. But I mean, Donald Trump ran as a populist. It should not be a surprise that he is governing as such.
Lonnie, how do you think this is going to play? I mean, I thought it was notable in an interview today with CNBC. He said, yeah, this might be something that the mayor of New York would propose.
Yeah. Well, because I think there's some truth to that. And I mean, it is true. He did campaign as a populist. I think there were many populist themes in terms of the policies that he's proposed. And the question really is, to what degree do non-MAGA voters see those as appealing proposals? Or does the very fact that they've been proposed by Donald Trump make them less appealing? I think that's going to be one of the interesting questions, because ordinarily, something like credit card rate caps, you might actually get a substantial percentage of Americans who say, yeah, we should do that. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why I don't think we should, but putting that aside for a moment, I think the politics are interesting just because they're coming from Trump and not coming from Elizabeth Warren.
And they're not something you would necessarily hear from a Republican president.
Oh, certainly not.
They don't go line, hand in hand with a Republican president, so they could be surprising.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Archie, I want to zoom out and talk about Democrats heading into the midterms. We're getting a new data point. This is a CBS poll. It shows that 42% of Democrats don't have much confidence in congressional Democrats. What do you make of these numbers, and how much of a headwind is it for Democrats who, look, are feeling pretty bullish about potentially taking back the House? But how significant is that headwind?
Well, it's challenging because Democrats don't have much to really leverage in Washington right now. I mean, the president has done an exceptional job of gaining complete and full control of the House, Senate, and really kind of running his administration in a very efficient way for his priorities. But at the same time, so I think that's that frustration that Democrats. But if you look at the intensity and you look at some of these pieces, and we were talking about the MAGA base, I don't think as Democrats we're worried about the MAGA base. We're worried about independents for the midterms. We're worried about Latinos. We're worried about kind of the Trump coalition that can be weakened. And I think that'll be pivotal going in.
Yeah, Dan, what are you watching for at this very moment? I mean, Democrats, again, looking at a battleground that's a little bit smaller than it typically is, but one of the key groups that could be pivotal, Latino voters, obviously independent voters, younger voters.
Yeah. There's this fascinating decoupling between Democrats where they can be really angry at their leaders, but still really excited to vote for Democrats. And I don't know how to explain that, but it's fascinating that you can have this anger at your party, but still really be excited to get out and vote. And I think you're seeing that. There are plenty of young voters out there, for example, who voted for the president in 2024 because they thought he was the change candidate. Over the course of this last year, they have decided he is not the change candidate. And so they still harbor reservations about Democrats, but it does seem like they are far more interested in voting for that party despite those concerns.
Lonnie, when you talk to Republicans, and obviously the outlook for Democrats seems to be improving, particularly given some of these elections that we have seen, and just focusing on the House, how much concern is there? How much concern is there that resources will have to be diverted from states that seem safe to states that are now potentially in play?
Well, I do think the map has expanded. And I think for Republicans, the issue is at what point do they need to go out there, particularly congressional candidates, and say, I've got a plan, this is something I want to do, and almost separate themselves a little bit. Now, that's going to be extraordinarily difficult to do because Democrats are going to see this as a referendum on Donald Trump. They're going to paint Republicans into that corner. But there are discussions about whether that separation needs to happen.
All right, guys. Great conversation. Thank you so much, Dan Archie. Really appreciate it. And Lonnie, up next, we'll dive deeper into how the president's whirlwind day in Davos is being received here at home by members of Congress. A Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee joins me in studio next. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
I have tremendous respect for both the people of Greenland and the people of Denmark. Tremendous respect. But every NATO ally has an obligation to be able to defend their own territory. And the fact is, no nation or group of nations is in any position to be able to secure Greenland other than the United States.
Welcome back. That was President Trump earlier today speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos. As we said, hours later, the president saying the U.S. has now formed the framework for a deal on Greenland. Joining me now for more on the congressional reaction to the president's speech is Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida. He serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. So let me just get your reaction to the day's developments and what the president says is now a framework of a deal on Greenland.
Well, obviously, look, it's a good U-turn. Everyone's happy that, the president backed down earlier this morning about troops and then, now obviously has backed down. The bond market is undefeated, as it turns out. And so I think that's good news. Now, obviously, I think, look, there's aspects of the fact we want to prevent China and Russia, from getting more control of the Arctic. So there are some real implications for what's going on here. But the president did it, in my opinion, all the wrong way. He said we're getting everything we wanted under this deal. I mean, we're getting everything we wanted but for Greenland. When you draw a circle, no matter where you start, you wind up at the same place. So look, Canada's not the 51st state, and Greenland is not part of America.
To that point, do you think there is some damage that has been done that cannot be undone? You heard some of the speeches from European leaders, from the Canadian Prime Minister, really forceful words saying effectively that they're not going to be bullied.
Yeah, no, I think there was some damage done. The question is how long. I mean, that'll last. Who knows? We'll move on to the next international issue. But clearly, this round did not go to the United States.
Given that you're on the Foreign Affairs Committee, what did you make of the speech overall and the fact that you now have Canada saying that it is looking to do a trade deal with China?
Yeah, huge problem. I saw Macron's comments also talking about China. Now, whether they're now trying to play tough with us and everyone's now jockeying for position, we'll see. This is, gamesmanship on the world stage. Obviously, that's the opposite effect of what we want, is to try to push people into China's arms because we don't look like a rational actor. And so, that's something I'm concerned about. We'll have to see how that turns out.
Let me ask you about some comments that President Trump made today about a domestic situation. He said that people will soon be prosecuted for their role in what he called the, quote, rigged 2020 election. What was your reaction to that? What do you make of that?
Well, I'm glad he's moved on, right? That's always good. I mean, even though he's president again, right? I'm glad he's moved on from that. I don't know. I mean, today we heard that we were going to balance the $38 trillion debt off of the back of Minnesota, right? And so he says a lot of things. I don't know what it means. Sometimes nobody knows what it means. But, we'll have to see. I mean, obviously, there's no one that needs to be prosecuted. This went in front of, I don't know, several dozen judges. They said nothing was wrong, nothing was stolen. And the president really needs to move on for this.
Does it concern you, though, that there could be more, at least, investigations coming?
Oh, of course. I mean,
you take him seriously.
Oh, yeah. Listen, I take the president very seriously. I mean, I know sometimes he tacos, right? But, I mean, on other stuff, he doesn't. And so when that taco is going to happen, you never know. I mean, look, you got Lisa Cook in front of the Supreme Court, right? You got Jerome Powell getting stuff from DOJ, right? You got, a number of people that are getting letters from DOJ. They say they're going after the folks in Minnesota now. And so, no. We got to take the president at his word and then see what happens.
All right, let's shift to what's happening on Capitol Hill. Obviously, government funding runs out in a few weeks now. It seems like there's a deal coming together that would fund DHS. It does include some of the changes that Democrats were calling for, but certainly not all of them. Are you, at this point in time, preparing to vote yes on this piece of legislation?
Yeah, so I'm going to vote for the first part of the minibus, but I'm a no vote on DHS. But I'm a no vote on DHS for lots of reasons. I'm the only former emergency management director in Congress, and we don't talk about it a lot because we haven't had a big disaster. But Kristi Noem has absolutely decimated FEMA. And so the idea of giving her more money, she's gotten $22 billion in the last CR. None of that money is moving. There are red states that are owed billions of dollars. Florida's owed $2.6 billion. None of that money is moving. And so I don't know why they would need new money. They got $170 billion in the big, beautiful bill. Congress has no idea how much money is left. I thought Republicans cared about spending in DOGE. Remember that whole thing? And now they're asking for more money when we don't know how much they have. And so, look, if they need a supplemental because they run out of money, they can come to Congress for a supplemental. But I'm not interested in giving them more money.
Could DHS shut down for a period of time, though?
There's no evidence of that. They've not made that case. There's no evidence of that.
What do you say, though, to your colleagues who say, look, we're just coming off of the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. Let's not hold up more funding to parts of the government. Let's vote yes. What do you say to that?
I don't want to shut down the government. So I'm not interested in shutting down the government. But there's no evidence that if they don't get this additional funding that would happen. They've not made that argument, and there's no evidence that it would be. I mean, I think $170 billion plus the money they got in the fiscal year for 2025. Yeah. And so she's got plenty of money, the secretary, right? And she's destroying government as it is, right? Shrinking departments, firing people. There's no evidence that she needs any more money.
Let me ask you more broadly about the midterms. I just cited this poll with the panel. One of the headwinds looming over Democrats heading to the midterms, a recent CBS poll finding that 42% of voters say they don't have much confidence in congressional Democrats to effectively oppose Trump on issues they disagree with. What do you make of those numbers, and how do you combat them?
Well, look, Congress's approval rating in general is, what, like 13%?
So you're not surprised?
I'm not surprised. I mean, we've earned it. We've worked really hard, by the way. No, we've earned it. Congress has done this to themselves.
How do you turn it around, though? How, as a Democrat, what's your message to other Democrats for how to turn it around?
Well, listen, we got to get Hakeem Jeffries the gavel. For the base that's upset that we haven't done enough, give Hakeem Jeffries the gavel, and they will get what they're looking for. But as Congress as an institution, Democrats and Republicans continue to take power away from ourselves and give it to the executive branch. We do that when we have full power. Republicans are doing it now. Democrats did it under Joe Biden. And so when we weaken the branch, when it's time to then for the minority party to use power, there's no power to use.
So what's the strategy? Is it, do you think, focusing on affordability on the campaign trail? Is it the Epstein files? Is it a counterweight to Trump. What should the message and strategy?
It should be all about affordability and healthcare. We should talk all about affordability and healthcare. Notice how when affordability was in the news and healthcare was in the news, that's when Donald Trump started talking about Greenland. He's a master at making sure that we take misdirection and we take debate every time. We got to stay focused on affordability and healthcare.
Okay, Congressman Moskowitz, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your being in studio. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, and there's more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.